going to have two bill hearings today. We will start with Senate Bill 77. We will open that hearing with an overview of the bill by Revisor David Weeks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, committee. Senate Bill 77 concerns some administrative rules and regulations. It would require state agencies prior to revoking rules and regulations to provide written notice to businesses, local governmental units, and members of the public known to the agency to be affected by the proposed revocation. This bill also removes certain abolished or inactive agencies from the 5-year agency review of rules and regulations requirements. I will note that this bill does become effective upon publication in the Kansas Register, so a little sooner than some, and I can stand for any questions.
Thank you, committee. What questions do we have? Seeing none, thank you very much. We will now go to proponent testimony. It's becoming a frequent conferee, which we appreciate. Clay Barker, Deputy Secretary of State, General Counsel. Welcome back to committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Great to be here. And the Secretary of State is bringing this bill essentially on behalf of all government agencies. We rarely try to take that position, but we think we have uniform agreement. The virtually identical bill was given to the legislature last year, passed the House 120-0, went to the Senate, 2 minor amendments from Senator Francisco, passed 40-0, and then the bill number shell was repurposed, so it didn't become law. Essentially, this makes 2 small changes to a 2022 law that required a 5-year review by every agency of all its regulations. And what that did is it took the 116 agencies that were listed in the table of contents of the Kansas Administrative Regulations, divided them into 5 groups, and starting in 2023, each group would review all its regulations. So the first group had 18 members in it, and it would review their regulations. And they had to, because the first group included the Attorney General, Department of Administration, and Secretary of State, which was just lucky, that the 3 agencies that know the most about this process, we did a lot of work with the legislative agencies on how to implement it. And there was essentially a large spreadsheet would be created. On the left would be all the regulations for a particular agency, and then questions about what statute authorized the regulation, what statute was it implementing, a straight yes or no question, is this regulation necessary for the proper functioning of government, and then a lot of other questions about federal implications and can it be revoked. And if you're curious, there's about 29,000 laws in Kansas, there's about 9,000 regulations, and most of the regulations are there because the legislature ordered an agency to write them, which can sometimes cause problems with trying to revoke regulations. It's because the legislature told the agency, you shall write one. So going through this process for the first time, there was a second piece to this legislation. That was, for the first time, the legislature allowed agencies to do an expedited repeal of a regulation. It was a fast track to get rid of them. And normally getting rid of a regulation is as hard as putting one into the process. It can take up to a year with all the reviews. This was an expedited process, but what we found in the first year was that many agencies were afraid to use the expedited process because it had a provision that said, if a member of the public asks for a hearing, you must give it to them. But there was no standard for how to let the public know, to let the agency know to have a hearing. And so some agencies were hesitant to use this new tool, which would be very beneficial. So this bill makes 2 fixes. One is, after talking to all the agencies, we've added in some language about the standard an agency must use to notify the public that it's doing an expedited repeal to see if they want a hearing. And the language is fairly generic, but that's because agencies have so many different publics they deal with. If I write a regulations bill, it's 105 election clerks, but other agencies may have the whole public, they may have trade organizations, but we say if an agency knows that someone's interested in the subject matter, they must notify them. We think that'll be a great step forward as new agencies use this expedited repeal. And as long as we were making corrections to the 5-year review bill, of the 116 agencies, 20 of them no longer exist. They got in the bill because they're listed in the table of contents, but they were removed from existence years ago often, and they're in the table of contents because we have to keep track of all old regulations, but we just removed those to just simplify the bill a little bit in case people were trying to figure out why an agency wasn't acting, and that's because it no longer exists. And those are the only two changes we're requesting, Madam Chair, and I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you. Committee, what questions do we have? Mr. Barker? Seeing none.
Thank you, Madam.
Thank you very much. Committee, there is no other testimony, no neutral, no opponent on this bill. So with that, we will close the hearing on Senate Bill 77 and turn our attention to Senate Bill 85, where we will open the hearing again with an overview of the bill by our reviser, David Weiss.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senate Bill 85 directs the Secretary for Children and Families to enter into agreements with state agencies for the continuous review and comparison of data for public assistance eligibility, specifically the verify eligibility for the Food Assistance Program or the SNAP program. The Secretary shall enter into data matching agreements with state agencies to compare data related to households enrolled in food assistance with other state data sets. The Secretary shall receive and review state information that may affect eligibility for the Food Assistance Program from the Office of Iowa Statistics, Department of Labor, Department of Revenue, and Department of Corrections, the Kansas Lottery, Kansas Racing and Gaming Commission, along with out-of-state electronic benefit transfer transactions. The bill also requires the Secretary to review data from some federal sources maintained by the Social Security Administration, Department of Health and Human Services, Department of Housing and Urban Development, and the FBI. On at least a quarterly basis, the Secretary shall make available to the public on the Kansas Department for Children and Families website data from findings of noncompliance and fraud investigations in the food assistance program for the following aggregate non-confidential and non-personally identifying information: the number of households investigated for intentional program violations or fraud, total number of households referred to the Attorney General's Office for prosecution, improper payments and expenditures, monies received, data concerning improper payments and ineligible recipients as a percentage of those investigated and reviewed, and finally, the amount of funds expended by electronic benefit card transactions in each state outside of Kansas. And I'd be happy to stand for any questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Committee. What questions do we have for the reviser? Seeing none, thank you very much. We will now go to proponent testimony. We will have Stephen Green on behalf of Clay Roads Visiting Fellow Opportunity Solutions Project. Welcome to committee.
Thank you for having me, and good morning, Chairwoman Erickson and members of the Government Efficiency Committee. My name is Steve Green. I'm here to support Senate Bill 85 on behalf of Opportunity Solutions Project. Opportunity Solutions Project is a nonprofit advocacy organization. As you heard maybe yesterday, they're represented in about 32 states. And what their goal is to work towards is to improve lives through free enterprise, individual liberty, and limited and accountable government. I want to give you a bit of a background about this topic that we're looking at today, but also professionally. I had the opportunity and privilege of working for the Department for Children and Families for a couple years, and then went up to the state of Nebraska and was Deputy Director of Children and Family Services in the state. This was actually an area that I had some oversight up there. And so what I want to say first is that I believe, and I've had conversations with the Department for Children and Families just sort of about this issue and other things. And I don't want this testimony to be seen like it's in no way meant to be aimed at saying anything that they're doing wrong as a group. I think Department for Children and Families does great work. I think the people that will be speaking on behalf of the Department for Children and Families are committed professionals doing the best job that they are capable of doing. And so I want you all to hear that just have the highest respect for the agency itself. But I want to talk about an issue that is sort of not getting a lot of attention, but it's sort of growing and sort of you all hearing more about it. Last week you heard from the Office of Inspector General about Medicaid fraud, and I want to talk a little bit about SNAP or EBT fraud, and also what this bill is trying to do. So currently in Kansas, we have an improper payment rate of about 12%. I meant to get this all to you before the hearing today, but this came off of FNS's website, and it actually gives a sort of 2013 to 2022 trend of improper payments. For example, in 2013, the improper payment rate was 3.99%. As of this last year, it has actually ballooned to about 12%. What is improper payment rate or error rate in SNAP? Essentially, and DCF could provide probably a cleaner answer, is that when they determine eligibility, or food stamps in this case, or food assistance in this case, they are either overpaying the amount of benefits that that person or that household should be eligible for, or they're underpaying. So if you're eligible by the book of $300, perhaps DCF is giving $350. That's an overpayment. An underpayment is, by the book, you're eligible for $300 hypothetically, and they're underpaying you. What you see across sort of state trends and sort of year over year is that underpayment rate stays really low overall, especially compared to the overpayment. And what I'm trying to demonstrate is that we're really seeing a ballooning of the overpayment rates that are occurring, and some of it might be related to COVID-19 and some of the restrictions were lifted, but there hasn't been a tightening of the overpayment rates in the state of Kansas. Just for perspective, it's worse actually currently than the national average. Kansas neighbors, Colorado, Missouri, Nebraska, and Oklahoma are all lower. And it's important to understand that these are dollars that we might want to think of, well, they're just federal money. What's the big deal? Well, these are still taxpayer dollars, and they're exceeding the amount of benefits that somebody should be eligible for. And so just want to highlight that for a second. The high error rate is no accident, in part because Kansas doesn't require households to report changes between recertifications unless the changes make them fully ineligible. You might hear, and it is true, that if you receive food stamps or assistance, that if you were to report any changes of income, or if you don't think that you're no longer qualified, what I would say is that is a soft policy. That is typically true across most states. And so if you're not proactively looking for recertification or redetermining eligibility, you're just going to have kind of a soft front door or a back door to close or determine whether or not somebody's actually eligible for benefits. There is a cost to the state, though. Every state that I think it's above 6% improper or payment error rate goes under a corrective action plan. You experience that almost in every state. That can result in the state having to pay back the amount of improper payments for a fiscal year. I don't know if that's the case here in Kansas. I'm sure the DCF could tell you if they are under a corrective action plan and if there's been any sort of clawbacks, for lack of a better word, as a result of how high the rate is. But this bill is meant to address that specific problem. By requiring monthly data cross-checks of food stamp enrollment against death, lottery, incarceration records, and potential changes in residency, and quarterly cross-checks against wages, tax, and income records, Kansas can strengthen its safety net and sort of remove ineligible individuals, bringing the focus back to reserving our resources for those that are truly needy. And this bill isn't meant to be aimed at, if you're eligible for SNAP, you've met all the qualifications for SNAP. We are not saying that we have a problem with that household or person receiving SNAP. They are eligible, they need the help, they should receive the benefits. What we are trying to identify is if somebody's moved out of state, they haven't reported that change of address, and they're still receiving an EBT card in Kansas. We think there should be tightening so that the state of Kansas is no longer servicing their economic assistance programs. It should be the state in which they reside in. The good news is this, that with regard to this bill, Kansas has a lot of these records readily available. What I would say, too, is there is a lot of third-party vendors that provide this type of service. I haven't been able to see the fiscal note yet, but I would assume that the third-party vendors that are able to provide it can provide it in real-time service and do so in a way that would actually help streamline these checks on a real-time average. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have, and I appreciate the opportunity to testify in support of this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Green. We will take all proponent testimony and then open it up for questions. Committee, we next have Karen Siebert, Advocacy and Public Policy Advisor, Harvesters, the Community Food Network, Kansas Food Bank, Second Harvest Community Food Bank.
Good morning. Thank you.
And you are a proponent, correct?
No, I'm an opponent.
Opponent. My apologies.
Is there another proponent, or are you ready for me?
Okay, I'm sorry, on my list, I had you as a
Okay.
proponent, so if you could hold, we will now take questions for Mr. Green. Committee, what questions do we have? Senator Alley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The question you mentioned that they had an EBT card, they go across, they issued in Kansas, and they go across the state line going to Missouri. Can they use that EBT card in Missouri?
Yeah, federal guidelines, regulations doesn't prevent anybody from not being able to use a food stamp or EBT card in state lines. So, for example, if you're an EBT recipient in Kansas, you're traveling to Missouri to visit family, and you decide to buy, food along the way in a store in Missouri, it's a total allowable transaction, and that happens quite frequently. Especially, you'll see that in Kansas City area and sort of bordering communities. But what you can also see, and we saw this in Nebraska when we started to get a lot more serious about EBT fraud or just improper payments or no longer being eligible, is that a person moves out of state, or they applied for benefits in the state of Kansas, and now they're in the state of Iowa, and they've been living there for 2, 3, 4, 5 months. That's considered a change of address, and right now in Kansas, the Kansas policy is that once they receive benefits for food stamps, they don't redetermine eligibility for another 12 months. And what I would say is there's plenty of flexibility within what's called the state option or SNAP options report to redetermine benefits on a lot sort of sooner notice for just, I think, overall program integrity. Obviously, this bill's pretty short turnaround, but it could be anywhere from 4 months, 6 months. And what that does is it creates a sort of a stronger back door so that oftentimes, and the Office of Inspector General can probably talk more about this, or KDHE, a lot of times those families or those households are also eligible for Medicaid, and there is a state portion of that. And so that's when you really notice that it becomes a cost to the state, is when there's that state-federal match for a benefit. And so you didn't necessarily answer or ask all those other questions, but I wanted to provide some context to the issue of sort of interstate travel and using benefits, and why it's important that we know their residency.
Could they also apply for one if they went to Iowa?
Sure. Yeah.
You could have 2 EBT cards?
You could, but that gets into the weeds. I think that they would. I think there's generally a sense of trying to stop that sort of illicit or activity. I think DCF would be better poised of knowing just kind of the protocol and the policy checks that they do for that. I don't want to speak for them because I'm not quite aware of how they check that.
I was thinking not they're trying to do something illegal, but they were here, got their EBT card, moved to Iowa 4 months later, they apply there, they really have 2 counts.
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah. I would say it's within the realm of possibility for sure.
Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Steve. You mentioned that other states like Arkansas, Florida, and Oklahoma have taken action to apply these common sense, these checks. How long have those been in place, and do you know any results from those states?
Yeah. So thank you, Chairwoman Erickson. Thank you, Senator, for the question. You asked specifically how long. I don't know how long those checks have been in place. What I can say is, and what I don't want to do is, I don't want to exaggerate Kansas as not being as sort of the outlier. The improper payment rates is something that they've noticed across the country, and I think that's a fair statement. So it's not like everybody else is going significantly down, and Kansas is the one that's the outlier. The outlier is the fact that their error rate is pretty significant or pretty high. But so looking at the different error rates from that fiscal year 2013 to 2022, you do see that Kansas is higher than Arkansas, Oklahoma, Nebraska, and Missouri from the federal reporting site. So I'll follow up and find out when they implemented those changes and get back to the committee.
Yeah, and if there's, any change at all, it would be good to know, what kind of results they've had from those. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, if I may just follow up to that. One thing that you might hear as we have this conversation to this point of, well, it's only 5% or 3% of fraud across the food stamp program. It's not that significant. When we are thinking about a $100 billion program, not just nationally, that is a significant cost to the taxpayer. And so even closing or tightening the restrictions so that we're reducing the amount of fraud is still going to be a savings to taxpayers across the country.
Senator Holscher. Committee, any other questions? Seeing none, we will now move to opponent testimony. My apologies. And Karen Siebert, if you will come back up, we appreciate it. Welcome back to committee.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairwoman Erickson and committee, for the opportunity to talk with you today. This testimony is submitted on behalf of Harvesters, the Kansas Food Bank, and Second Harvest Community Food Bank, which together serve all 105 counties in the state and serve the food insecure. Last year, our networks of charitable food pantries distributed more than 46 million pounds of food to those in need in Kansas, from our smallest rural communities to major metropolitan areas. We oppose Senate Bill 85. The bill's requirements for continuous review and comparison of data will place more strain on DCF staff and, as such, could threaten the food assistance benefits of low-income Kansans. It is critical for our food banks and our partner community and church food pantries in your districts that the food assistance program operate efficiently in Kansas. That's because for every one meal that a food bank provides, SNAP provides 9. The efficient delivery of the SNAP program is absolutely critical. It's the cornerstone of the public-private response to food insecurity in our communities. Our local food pantries and their volunteers and donors are incredibly committed and creative, but they're already stretched very thin. Opportunity Solutions Project has dropped this bill in several other states. We're not sure why this particular set of data matches were included in the Kansas bill, since I believe we will hear from DCF testimony and may hear from verbal testimony as well, that the agency already does most of these matches, and in some cases more frequently than required in the bill language. We know of at least one state in which a similar bill was implemented, and that's Ohio. In Ohio, the data matches from a for-profit company resulted in outdated information being sent to caseworkers as alerts. These alerts all had to be checked and cleared by agency staff, which prevented them from processing outstanding applications and renewals. Millions of duplicative alerts bogged down the state's computer system and the workers. The legislature had to intervene. We do not want to replicate that situation in Kansas. We respectfully ask that you oppose SB 85. This is a solution in search of a problem and will make our state government less efficient. And I do want to follow up from the previous questions regarding the situation of being in two different states and moving. In the last Farm Bill, with Senator Roberts as chair of the Ag Committee, that was part of the Farm Bill, is to create a national data clearinghouse for the USDA for food and nutrition services, to be able to cross-check those cards between states to make sure that that is caught as quickly as possible if those benefits were to overlap. And so that is handled at the federal level. So, and then also just wanted to clarify that there's SNAP fraud rate is about 1.6% federally, and that is the trafficking rate. And to further emphasize the previous conferee's comments that the error rate is different than a fraud rate. So just wanted to make that note. I'm happy to stand for questions.
Thank you. We do have one other proponent, I believe, opponent. So we will take that and then open it up for questions. And committee, we have Dr. Carla Whiteside-Hicks, Director of Economic and Employment Services from the Kansas Department of Children and Families. Welcome to committee.
Thank you. Good morning to the committee chair and the committee members. Thank you for providing this opportunity to speak on this issue. I want to say first that DCF does support verification of information that is provided for that we use in to determine eligibility for public assistance programs and for information that is not provided that we know will impact whether or not a household is eligible for benefits and to what degree that household is eligible. What I want to do now is to talk about the significant processes that we already have in place to verify the information that we receive or that we should receive. First of all, for the vital statistics, including death records, we already received those. So the bill is asking us for us to verify that monthly. We receive that information, and there's a daily process that we have in our eligibility determination system that would automatically send us a task that says this person is receiving assistance. We now have a date of death for this individual. You need to take action. So we do have that in place already. The bill calls for a quarterly report from the Department of Labor to report changes in our in employment or wages. We do receive that. As you probably know, information is reported from Kansas employers to Department of Labor on a quarterly basis. At application, at review, and anytime a household reports a change in their household status, we review that information from the Department of Labor. A monthly report that would allow us to identify changes in residency as identified by out-of-state electronic benefits transfer transactions. We receive a daily report from FIS, is the company that owns the electronic benefit transfer or EBT card process. We do receive that daily report and we verify that information. As was mentioned earlier, I do want to also just remind you that we do have areas in Kansas that are on borders for another state. For example, Wyandotte County. The state of Missouri can be across a river, across a street, next door. So there are times when that store in Missouri really is the closest grocery store to where you live in the state of Kansas. But so in reviewing that, we're looking at a map also. I have a team of individuals who review that information, and they will notice things. For example, some of you may have heard just earlier this week, we had a skimming event in Wyandotte County, actually. It was noticed by my team. In a daily report, it was noticed that there was one phone number that was requesting benefit information for multiple EBT cards. We immediately shut those cards down, transferred those benefits to a new EBT card, and we are mailing those EBT cards out, those new cards out to those individuals. This one skimming incident, from one grocery store, by the way, we are estimating so far it has impacted more than 500 households, and we're thinking it may be up to 1,000 households. So we do have those processes in place to make sure that we are verifying and keeping benefits safe for individuals. The bill also calls for, on a quarterly basis, that we would review information from the Department of Revenue, including changes in income and wages. We do have a data match with the IRS so that we get that information regularly. We are looking specifically for information that is reported on a 1099. That some individuals may not, that we would not be able to get that information from other sources. So we do review that information regularly. We also, the bill also calls for on a monthly basis that we get information from Department of Corrections regarding incarcerated individuals. We do receive a monthly report already, and we match the data from that report to individuals who are receiving or have applied for benefits from us. The bill calls for a semi-monthly review of Department of Labor, including changes in employment. And again, we do review that information anytime there is a change in household status, at application, at review. And when I say review, it's not necessarily a 12-month review. There are, for most households, in addition to that 12-month review, which is basically a whole new application, there is also a 6-month interim report. The household is required to submit that report in order to continue benefits past that 6 month. And so we are reviewing information at that point also. One other thing is that because we share our eligibility determination system with ks.gov, if someone in a household is receiving medical assistance, their address is in our eligibility determination system. If we have a different address on the home address on the non-medical side, we get an alert for that. And that is our trigger to reach out to that household and require them to verify where they are actually living. Let's see, the bill requires, the match for Kansas Lottery and Racing and Gaming. We do get a match from those systems. Right now, however, the report that we get is for winnings that exceed $3,500 a month, $3,500, and I believe the bill is asking for $3,000. That would be an easy data fix so that we could change the parameters of that report that we are receiving. I think the two that we are not doing right now, the additional information from Social Security Administration, we do have an interface with Social Security Administration. So we already are alerted when someone who is receiving benefits begins receiving Social Security benefits, those benefits end or those benefits change. We get a daily interface that would give us that information so that we are then triggered to take case action for that family. Some of the information that is being requested specifically through the beneficiary earning exchange record, we do not participate in that match. We did years ago. We no longer do that. And one of the reasons is that Social Security Administration requires that a high level of security for access to that data record. And because we do not own, the state does not own our eligibility determination system, it's owned by Accenture. State employees can have access to that information. Accenture cannot. Because they are a contractor. So we would not be able to enter into an agreement to have a seamless data match to be able to get that information. It would have to be a manual process. For the national, the directory of new hires and for child support enforcement, we do have that data match. We already participate in that program. That is a requirement from Food and Nutrition Services. So we have that up and running. The two that we are not doing currently, we do not have a data match with housing and urban development. One of the reasons for that is any information that a household would provide to housing and urban development, we would likely have to re-verify that information. So if we get it directly from HUD instead of directly from the client, we would have to re-verify that information, and we're using the same information to verify eligibility. So it is easier for us and more effective for us to simply get that information directly from the client. And the final one that we do not participate in is the fleeing felon information. Food and Nutrition Services has determined that unless we can verify that the potential fleeing felon, the alleged fleeing felon is aware that there is a warrant out for that person's arrest, that we cannot hold that person accountable for not reporting to us that they are a fleeing felon. So because of that, we use things like Casper. We go online, we check records that we have with incarcerated individuals in Kansas and incarcerated individuals at the federal level. So that is a manual match that we do to be able to verify that information. In terms of adding data to our website, we can absolutely do that. One of the projects I have my team working on right now is building out a dashboard for our public-facing website so that questions that anyone has are out there. We're in the process of making sure that all of our state plans are on the website, that corrective action plans that we have. And yes, we do have a corrective action plan with Food and Nutrition Services, and we are moving forward with our numbers are improving, and we are fully expect that by this fall, we will have satisfied the requirements of Food and Nutrition Services, and we will no longer be under a corrective action plan for our payment, for improper payments. And I do want to reiterate what was mentioned earlier. Improper payments and fraud are not the same thing. An improper payment can be agency error. It can be, as an eligibility worker, I did not properly enter paycheck information into the system, and so the wrong income was counted. That's not fraud. That is an error on the part of the agency. So I want to be clear about that. And I believe that is all I have. I now stand for questions.
Thank you so much. Committee, what questions do we have? I'm sorry, Senator Schmidt and Senator Holscher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this is for any of the opponents here. I have a concern about the hearings that we've had today and yesterday, because I have a lot of people in my district that receive these benefits. And my heart gets heavy when I see bodies like this focusing on the least among us with what I think are oftentimes unproductive solutions. I hate fraud, and when I'm knocking doors, the people that are receiving these benefits also hate fraud. They hate it. They tell me about it. But I just want to read, and if any of the opponents have any response, a post from one of the faith leaders in my community about this focus that we're having right now on SNAP benefits. And they said, we believe poverty isn't a lack of money, it's a loss of choice. And when you live in an under-resourced situation, the first thing stripped away is your ability to choose. And the system starts treating your lack of resources as a lack of wisdom, and that narrative is false. And if we move forward with these bills, it's continuing a pattern of restricting people experiencing poverty with tools of control disguised as help. And the message is, if you need help, you don't deserve autonomy. So if you or Karen have any response to that, I'd appreciate it. But I hope that we could think about that as we move forward with these sorts of bills.
I'm going to take that one because I don't believe that was a question necessarily for the opponents, but more about the focus of the legislation that this committee has taken forth. This committee is government efficiency. Wherein we see fraud and abuse happening, it is our job to take a look at it as appropriators of the funds that the taxpayers have entrusted us with. The more fraud and abuse that we can reduce, the more resources that are available for the very people that you're talking about, sir. So with all due respect, the motivation is to make sure that we are maximizing our resources so that the bad actors aren't getting access to the resources so we can help more people in need. So with that, if you would care to respond, you may.
Absolutely, and I appreciate that. We also do not want to see fraud. I will say one of the benefits of our combined eligibility determination system, we're not just sharing with KDHE, we're also, for medical, we're also sharing within DCF with child support enforcement, with foster care. In addition to the USD programs I oversee, I also have TANF and child care and LEAP. And because of that integration, we are better able to identify when information does not match. So my response would simply be, obviously we are aware of fraud. I would caution us to make sure that we are looking at true fraud and not an innocent error or an error that is on the part of a third actor or the agency that is not intentional fraud on the part of the client.
And I do appreciate that distinction. I do think that's an important point. I would, however, say the result is the same. Resources are not being appropriated or gotten to where they were intended to. Senator Holscher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have two questions. In regard to the conversation earlier that a person could have two EBT cards, is that, I mean, it sounds like there's a lot of checks in places. So can you tell me, like, with what frequency or what?
There is a federal check, and I will say, so on our application, on our assistance application, we do, obviously I shouldn't say on the application, we are asking during the interview process how long you've been in the state of Kansas. And so if you tell me you've been here for 2 months, I'm going to ask you, where were you before? If you have children, I'm going to check in that other state for TANF months, for food assistance. So we're going to go in and we're going to check those other states. There is also an automated match. It's called our Paris match. It is a national network. And we get a quarterly report that identifies individuals who are receiving benefits in another state.
Great, and I do have a second, if that's okay. The second one is, it sounds like, just looking at the fiscal note, this is a pretty hefty amount of money that would have to be invested to add these additional checks in place, some of which are duplicative. So the other thing I noticed too is that when we talk about that error rate, it was mentioned 12%. If I'm looking at this correctly, the national average is 11.68%. So we are right there, and all of our neighbors appear to be right around that area too. And there are some states that have 22 and 36% error rates. So my question is this is, like I said, it appears to be a pretty hefty expenditure to add in functions that are already in place, correct?
That is correct. You are correct. Our error rate is in line with many other states. It doesn't mean that it's okay. We still have work to do. But I don't know, if we're addressing fraud, I don't know that this bill will address fraud.
Thank you.
Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for your testimony. I appreciate it. Is there, I mean, it sounds like you're complying already with some of these things, but as the chair mentioned, you know, we're looking for ways to make this more efficient. Is there, and you'd have some recommendations to how you might comply with the bill. If we were to make some of these changes, could you support this bill?
It would depend on the changes. Some we're simply not able to do. So for example, one of the data matches from Social Security Administration, I can't do anything about the federal government saying you can't give our information to a contractor. So it could be in the bill. We would be out of compliance with that if, unless the federal regulations would change.
And with regard to that corrective action plan, are the feds considering repayment options for Kansas right now?
We are not at that point. And I will say we didn't just get a corrective action plan and then we try to figure it out. We are in regular communication with Food and Nutrition Services. We provide regular written updates to them. And so not every area, if you've seen their findings, so let's say, and there are a number of findings that we would have, and then we address each of those findings. Some of those findings are already closed because we've made the improvements that we need to make. So we provide updates, then we get a response that says, yes, we will close this, or nope, you still have some more work to do on this, and so then we continue to work on that.
One more, Madam Chair, thank you. If you could identify one area that you could say that would improve this situation for Kansas, what would it be?
Fraud or the error rate?
Well, maybe both, yeah.
For the error rate, we have made significant progress, and primarily because we have a process, it's called business process management. So we actually brought in consultants to take us back to what we had said we were going to do several years ago, I believe starting in 2011 is when we started with business process management. And so it's reteaching our staff what processes they need to be following, how they need to document, what they need to verify. We have a verification matrix that shows staff, here's what you need to do to be, or here are the acceptable means of verification for these processes. So continuing down that path will help us. I can tell you 2 years ago, we were more than 300 days out on our tracker, meaning you submitted an application to us or any document to us 356 days ago, we were likely just now getting to it today. As of this morning, we are around 25 days out on the tracker, and that is from retraining our staff, following the process, and doing what we know needs to be done, and not doing work that doesn't need to be done. So only narrowing it down to the value-added work.
And that would handle both the fraud and the error rate?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Other questions? I just have a couple. The testimony previously said that the error rate is going up. Is that accurate?
The error, did you say error rate? No, for Kansas, the error rate is not going up.
It is not going up.
No. And let me clarify that. It could be that there is a spike 1 month or 1 quarter because of, I don't know, staff being out, during COVID and things like that. But there's not, when we look at the trend overall in terms of our corrective action plan, we are in a better place with our error rate now than we were when the corrective action plan was first initiated.
Okay. Well, it would be nice if we could maybe see some of that data
Absolutely.
that would show us how it's gone, how it's moved. I think that would be helpful for the committee.
Okay.
The other question I have, and this may not be for you, but I believe your agency did report, is on the fiscal note. In committee, we had the wrong fiscal note submitted, but you do now have that in your email. So I want to draw your attention to the updated fiscal note. And that fiscal note just seems really, really high. If you already have the vast majority of these safeguards in place, why would it take so much money and so many FTEs?
Technology is expensive. And if a data check, for example, the interface with Social Security Administration, if we cannot implement that in a seamless manner through a data match, then we would have to assign staff to do that. So that is likely where the FTEs are coming from.
Okay, thank you. And just to give me a rough ballpark, can you tell me where the rate was before the corrective action and then where it is now?
I cannot. I can get that for you.
Okay. Committee, any other questions? Seeing none, thank you so much for your testimony and for being here today. Okay, committee, we will close the hearing on Senate Bill 85. And tomorrow, we will have another presentation from the Inspector General digging down into what we can do about recommendations that are made from the office to agencies. And then we will begin working bills. So just to let you know, we will work in the order that we heard the bills, and we will work them just based on how much time we have left in committee. So please come prepared, and I can tell you the first one we will work, if we have time tomorrow, is SB 13, then 79, and the two we heard today, 77 and 85. That will be the order, just depending on how much time we have left in committee. Are there any questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you, everyone.